Take a ride, ride on your life. Take a ride. If you're feeling out of balance and you're put to the test, take the ride.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Kick Conflict to the Curb, where growth-minded professionals discover the latest information about conflicts such as bullies, narcissists, micromanagers, and to make sure that their direct reports feel heard and respected. I'm your host, Joyce Weiss, communication coach and queen of conflict resolution. Small groups and individuals come to me so they reduce stress and improve relationships. How do they do that, you may ask? They transform from not knowing how to start a tough conversation to feeling confident using their voice without using their cool. And I'm excited to discuss conflict, good conflict, and how you have to have good conflict to have collaboration with our special guest, Lynda McDermott. And I'd like to introduce you to Lynda. Lynda McDermott is the CEO and founder of EquiPro International, which provides customized leadership and team building development programs in both in-person and virtual formats. Lynda works with executives and entrepreneurs who want to implement stay-in-the-game leadership strategies that will increase their impact and influence to achieve winning results and ensure their personal and organizational success. Lynda is a certified speaking professional with the National Speakers Association and has her master's in organization development. She has worked in over 35 countries for such clients as Pfizer, Biogen, Hearst Magazines, and Price Waterhouse. Here's a fun fact. She became a mother at the age of 46 when she and her husband traveled to China to adopt a 13-month-old daughter. Welcome to the show, Lynda McDermott.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I've known you for 3 or 4 years, maybe more, and this is a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm excited because viewers, like Lynda said, we know each other from a couple networking groups that we belong to. And I just knew that one of these days I was going to invite Lynda, CEO and founder of EquiPro, to the program. So Lynda, I've got to start with a quote that you used in your book,
Right.
Stay in the Game Leadership Playbook, from Winston Churchill. And I want you to tell me more about it. If two people agree on everything, one of them is unnecessary. So tell us about that, please.
Well, I love that. I've always loved that quote. And so when I wrote the chapter on great collaboration requires good conflict that's in the book, and this our interview today is sort of based on, I couldn't resist putting that quote in there. And it's really interesting because we'll talk maybe a little bit about this, but if you come together with another person or team or organization to collaborate on something and to make decisions jointly to something that's going to benefit you the most, by definition, you're coming into that conversation with differences.
Mm-hmm.
So so the reason for coming together is because you have differences. And if you keep those differences kind of buried and just constantly, go for the safe answer, which is yes, I agree, you're not going to get the value of that diversity. And that's why that quote is so relevant.
Oh, good. I am so glad that you use that, because exactly, people, and we're going to get to, people are afraid of conflict. And here I am, the queen of conflict resolution, and there you are having lots of chapters about it.
Right.
So what are the most frequent sources of conflict between individuals? Let's start with the basics, lady.
Okay. Well, actually, as I was waking up this morning, I already had my work example that I'm going to use, but I was coming up with another kind of personal, not personal to me, but personal story, which I don't know if we have any sports aficionados, but some of you may know that my Tampa Buccaneers quarterback, Tom Brady, has recently just announced his retirement a second time. Now, that leads me to the story about why I picked that story. Long story short is that he retired a year ago, exactly a year ago today, from NFL, and he'd won 7 Super Bowls, and he retired. But 40 days later, he announced he was coming back to the Bucs to play. And 6 months later, he and his wife got a divorce. Now, the reason I use that as a story, and he's retiring and retiring for good, and I doubt that they'll get their marriage back together again, but that's not the reason for the story. The question is about what are the sources of conflict. Now, I only know what I read in the press, so I don't know these two people, but I can surmise that what happened was after 13 years of marriage, and she had given up her supermodel career to raise the kids, and then she's probably just ecstatic when he announces his retirement, and frustrated and probably angry when he announced that he was coming back to play with the Bucs. And so they got a divorce 6 months after he rejoined the Bucs. Didn't have such a great year. So sources of conflict can be beliefs and values and goals that you think you're in simpatico, but then all of a sudden life changes and you're not in simpatico anymore. Doesn't mean that you have to it has to lead to divorce, but it can be a source of conflict in a marriage, in a working relationship. So it's really important that you are transparent about your beliefs and values. And if they change, have good conversations about why they've changed and look for some win-win solutions. So
and Lynda, I need to thank you for that answer. And I was just working with a client yesterday. Her needs are not being met by her boyfriend. And she's afraid to tell him for many, many reasons, because like people fear conflict. She doesn't have the skills. And we discussed what it's costing her.
Right.
And I just love that answers of yours, because when we don't know that our values and beliefs, we know that they may be different from the person, whether it's work or home, but we better figure out how to communicate this. Otherwise, it's going to eat up inside and boom, the volcano comes.
Right. And I suspect that's what happened. It was building up in her because she had to give up her career. And so anyway, enough of that story, but it is a good story. And because they're so well known, had a lot of publicity around it. Now, my work example, I have a client who called me. She's a CEO of a marketing company. And she called me and said, I'm having trouble with one of my members of my leadership team. She's not getting along with her peers. There was more to it, but basically, will you come work with her? I said, sure. So I called, everything is not face-to-face as it used to be. So I got a Zoom call with her and, started chatting with her and tried to get the lay of the land from her. Turns out, yes, she acknowledged she was having some problems with her peers, but more importantly, she was having problems with her boss. They were constantly in conflict with one another, constantly. Now, there are two types of conflict. One is task-oriented conflict, and that has to do with, where you might differ on ideas or strategies or processes or policies. That's task-oriented conflict. The other type of conflict is relationship-oriented conflict. And what I got out of talking to both of them individually was at the end of the day, they usually landed on the same page in terms of their task conflict because they had similar experiences with client service and so forth. Where the rub was, it came in with their relationship. And why? Because as opposed to being incompatible, they both were compatible on a value. And it had to do with win, lose. I have to win at any cost. They were both so determined to go into these conversations having to win. So the boss had to win, and my coaching client had to win. And so it took them numerous conversations. I was never part of those conversations, but numerous conversations of, loud talking and storming out of rooms and so forth until they finally, I think they just got exhausted from the relationship issues and they finally landed on the same page, essentially on the task. So it's important, both of these examples stress the importance of if you are in conflict, and it doesn't have to be, like this conflict, it can be just tension, and it can be even mild disagreements. But as the tensions rise, there's more emotions attached to it, and it's harder to work it through in a very emotionally intelligent way. So what I ended up doing, since the CEO didn't ask me to coach her, she asked me to coach her team member. I
Mhm.
started working with the team member about, okay, how can you go into a conversation about, and then give me a topic, and how can you, after you hear her point of view, because she will always give you her point of view first, what's going to be your response to her point of view, even if you disagree? And so we worked on behaviors, things she could say that wouldn't escalate, or keep the temperature down until they could productively get to a point of consensus. And
Mhm.
so I'm happy to report that their relationship is stronger. The number of escalations that happen are much fewer, and they're reporting pretty good working relationships with each other. But I did not focus on the task issues because they weren't really in disagreement about those.
Mm-mm.
They
Mm-mm.
were their styles were they actually were compatible in the wrong direction. They each
Yes.
had a win-lose mentality, and they had to win, the other had to lose, and they weren't coming from a win-win place.
And
So
this is a perfect example. And I know, because you talk about this in your book, is it consists of talking and listening. And in that first situation of yours with your client, half the time, it happens with me too, um, people want to talk. They're not listening. They want to get their point across. They want to win. And man, I know that. I used to be that way. Why do you think I'm the queen of conflict resolution? Because I knew I had to change, some of my situations.
yeah,
So um,
there's a
here's a LinkedIn user who said, I appreciate you making the distinction between task related conflict and relationship
yeah,
related.
and it
Yay. That
yes,
was
and
great.
so if you're in a conflict oriented situation, it's really important that you assess, is it task? Is it
Yes.
relationship? It could be a combination of both, but focus on that first. And in this
Love it.
case with my client, we focus on relationship. There's a phrase when you were talking about listening. I was thinking when I was walking the dog this morning. There's a phrase, and I hope I get it right. Seek to understand before you seek to be understood.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So
And
that's
this is so hard for all of us,
right.
coaches and
Mindset.
clients. But once you get that secret, and to me, it's a secret because
Right.
most people don't get that. Once you get that, it's not about us at
Right.
first. You get to share your concern. You get a lot more traction when I forget the honey quote, better give sugar than salt or whatever
Right.
their quote is. But
Attract more bees with honey or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah. Between both of us, we'll get it.
Right.
Now, listen, in your book, you say, understand how leaders must practice emotional intelligence skills to balance collaboration and conflict effectively. Leaders who are watching this, or if they're not and you feel they need to, of course, the recording is going to be on
Right.
LinkedIn. Tell us more about that, because there are many leaders who don't have those soft skills.
Right.
Tell us more, Lynda McDermott.
Well, there are four. I wrote actually a PDF on emotional intelligence. So if you want a copy of that, just let us know. And my contact information is down there. There are four components to emotional intelligence. One is self-awareness. The second is self-management. The third is other awareness, being aware of others' behaviors and responses, and then other management. So emotional intelligence starts with yourself. You have to understand, for example, when you're talking about conflict, there are things that trigger me. There,
Mhm.
there are situations and people that trigger me,
Of
like
course.
irresponsibility, lack of accountability. Those are things that really they trigger me. So I have to so I have to be aware of that. So if I sense that in a client or my 27-year-old daughter, uh,
Mhm.
I just have to know that can be a trigger for me. And so I have to really have my emotions in check around that. If I'm going to get into some kind of a tough or serious conversation with that individual, because what will happen is that my passing judgment on their irresponsibility or lack of accountability is going to raise my emotion up, and I'm not going to be able to call on the rational part of my brain, because that's really what emotional intelligence is it's teaching you what triggers you and how to. What happens is, it's a little technical, but what happens is when your emotions get the best of you, the amygdala, which is down here, part of your brain, which is an automatic response, it gets triggered and it wants to fight or flee.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is you say things you don't want to say, you do things you don't want to do, like stand up and run out of a room or whatever. And so the job of for you to be an emotionally intelligent leader is to get that frontal part of your rational part of your brain back under control.
And I'm going to expound a little bit more on that, because this is very, very important. Part of one of my Weiss communication success plan strategies, how do you like that for no ego in that, is the gap. And the gap, you step back and you think, what are my triggers? What are my triggers? And if you know ahead of time and somebody pushes it, you're going to have a little better chance not to explode.
Exactly.
So this is brilliant.
Yeah.
I would like to get into conflict with you, Lynda. Let's see how we do that. No, we're not going to really do it, but one day, viewers, if this happens, I'll report back to you.
Okay.
Now, Lynda, we have not, but this is another quote in your book. Stay in the game leadership playbook. We have not been taught to deal with conflict, and many people run away from conflict. I see this all the time. No judgment. This is not a judgment zone here. Tell us more about that. What have you seen in your own experience about that?
Well, I think part of the reason, and I think you alluded to it earlier in this show, part of the reason why people avoid conflict is because we are not taught, either by our parents or people who mentor us or our teachers or what, we are not. Conflict resolution skills are skills. They are they're grounded in actual skills like listening and active listening and giving feedback back to the person that you're talking to, those kinds of things. We're not taught that. And so once the tensions start to go up and your temperature physically starts to go up, you want to do you either want to punch the person, which is not appropriate in personal or work life, or you want to get out of the room fast. You want to get out of that conversation. And so we avoid it, or we, quote, take it offline, which is also, it can be actually a good strategy. If you're in a group setting and it's not appropriate to call the person out in the group setting, or you want to just give yourself time to get your emotions back in check. There's nothing wrong with taking things offline, not at all. But we tend to. I saw a study once that said, I don't know who did this study, but it was only like 70 to 75% of managers want to avoid conflict.
Excuse me. It's like, I know.
Yeah.
And you wonder why people are leaving.
Yeah.
Especially younger people, they don't avoid conflict.
Right.
They want to. Tell me more. Tell me how I can get better. So viewers, again, have your leaders watch this if you feel they need to, except you're not going to say that, hey, you need to watch this, because this is so important. Look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. When people are leaving, do I have the soft skills, the emotional intelligence? What am I doing to stop it? Now, I've got to ask you, did you ever have tough conversations? You have a tough conversation with colleagues, direct reports, or leaders.
It's so funny. Well, and we didn't practice these questions, folks who are on this call.
Oh, no.
So I will tell you, interestingly enough, the toughest conversation, non-work related, that I had came after, it was on Mother's Day of 1995, I think. Anyway, my husband had been married before and he had 2 kids and they had kids. And I had decided that I wanted to have a child, but I couldn't physically have a child. And he already had a medical procedure that didn't enable him to have a child.
Mhm.
So I had gone to a therapist, by the way, in the interest of transparency, because I didn't know how to have this conversation with him.
Mhm.
And this was like after 19 years of marriage. And we'd been married the way it
Of
was.
course.
And we had ground rules, like
Mhm.
we're never going to have kids, and I was going to have a career, and blah blah. Anyway, so very tough conversation. Very, like, in my personal history, that had to have been the toughest conversation that I ever had. But I think I know I handled it well, because at the end of the day, as Joyce mentioned, we ended up going to China and
Mhm.
adopting a 13-month, 13-pound little girl. I think the big thing that happened on that one is, if I go back to the skills we've talked about, I knew I had to share my point of view, because that was the context for the conversation.
Mhm.
But what I said was, what I'm going to talk about is going to be a real surprise for you. And I want you to know I'm not expecting a response this morning. I'm not expecting a response tonight. I'm not expecting a response in the next week, maybe even the next month, because I've had time to think about this.
Sure.
I've been in therapy to really see if I wanted to do this. And now I need to give you time.
Oh,
And
that's excellent.
now
See,
we're on your timetable.
you didn't jump in. Here we go again. It wasn't, you shared your agenda. Then you stepped back and said, okay, this is your time.
Right.
It's looking like I always tell people with bullies, this is what you do. Stop. We'll talk about that in another session. But
Right.
this is here, let me do a little careful, better than that. It's your time to think about what I just said. Let's get back and discuss.
Right.
This is excellent. And thank you so for being transparent.
Yeah,
So
I
I've
thought
got
about
to ask you, because I want to put on your contact information. Oh, before I do that, and we are going to, here's your contact information. We'll talk about your book in a moment. Our time is almost over.
I know, I'm
But
looking at the time like, how
I
have we gone?
know this is not fair. So, what is something in your toolbox that is your number one priority that you must do to keep your sanity? And I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it.
I am obsessively, and I'm using that word consciously, I'm obsessive about planning and prioritization. It's the only way. I have so many things going on in my life, because I run
Mhm.
2 not-for-profit organizations in addition to having my own business and doing these kinds of things and blah, blah, blah. Like, I just have to, I have piles, but I know what's in every pile, and I have a priority list in the morning every day to keep my sanity. And then I also have a great assistant who helps me keep saying, because she gives me like what's going on next week. So
Mhm.
you can get a jump on it. So that's the only way I keep my sanity, is because or I would be in conflict, like with my assistant or my daughter, because here's what would cause conflict: my stress. If I,
Yes.
if I'm, if I know when I'm under stress, my feeling is that it's uncontrollable.
Mhm.
I am ready to be triggered. I'm just prone to be triggered, because I don't like to be out of control around my tasks.
But the
So
good thing, and this is so important, viewers, whether you're watching live or later on, is that Lynda took time to figure out what, I mean, she didn't know one day I was going to ask her this question, but at this time, after thinking about it, what triggers you. And for me, it's movement. If I am sitting still and I'm not on my bike, yes, I live in Michigan, so I do YouTube exercises on an icy day on my bike, or walking or doing YouTube exercises. I am not a good person. I hold things in. It's my stress release and it's my self-care. But we both know what triggers us.
right,
Now, I can't leave this interview without asking you to talk about this great book that I keep on talking about and referring to. Excuse me. Ta-da! Stay in the Game Leadership Playbook. tell us briefly what it is and how people can find it.
Okay, well, very briefly, it is an ebook that was published by a London publisher by the name of Bookboon, and their contact information there it comes across the screen. And they asked me to write this book on leadership, and I could pick the title and pick the topics and so forth. And long story short, the title came from a note my father had written me when I was in college as a freshman, out of state, because I grew up in Ohio. I don't hold that against the fact that she lives in Michigan, against Joyce, because of course the Buckeyes don't like Michigan. Anyway, so I was away at school in North Carolina, and I was a cheerleader, and I joined a sorority, but I was miserable. And part of why I was miserable, it was a cultural change for me to be in the South after growing up in the Midwest and so forth. And I was calling home every weekend, bitching, moaning, and complaining, aka whining. And my dad had never written me a note ever. But I went to the mailbox because we didn't have internet and email and blah blah blah. So I got in my mailbox, and he had written me a note because I was supposed to be an Ohio State University quarterback, but came out as a girl. And so I always felt the pressure to be, quote, an All-American. And he said, "You've always been my All-American, and we'll figure out where you're going to go to school next year later. But now what I want you to do is I want you to stay in the game.
Wow. There
Keep
it
your head
is.
down, keep your head down, enjoy your cheerleading, enjoy your sorority, make friends. You're going to be there because you're not driving home. I'm not putting you on a train. You're staying there because you committed to that for a year, and I want you to stay in the game." And that has really, I mean, I was in 9/11 in New York City when it happened. And it was my daughter's first day of kindergarten. And all I could say to myself was, because, everything was wiped off my calendar.
Oh,
And
of
you couldn't
course.
call people up to ask for business. I mean, that was just, no, you just didn't do that. So I just said to myself every day that I got to stay in the game, Lynda.
Wow.
Stay in the game. We don't know where this is going, but stay in the game. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to stay in the job that you're currently in or stay in a relationship that you don't want to or shouldn't be in. It just means don't quit. Don't
Right.
quit life. Stay in the game and decide if you want to change the game. That's okay.
That's perfect. Thank
So
you,
that's why I've written that book.
Dad. Thank you, Lynda McDermott's father. Now, tell us, how can people find your book?
Okay, well, you can go to book, as it says across the screen, and you can contact me. I'll give you my email address. But you can go to bookboon.com. It is not something you can buy off of Amazon because it is it's proprietary to that publisher. But you can purchase it. I think it's US dollars. It's like $8, and that allows you to access the book 24/7. So it's not like how we buy books here in the United States. But it's only like it's 12,000 words. So you can read it if you go cover to cover, and it's got chapters on different skill areas to help you not only stay in the game, but succeed in whatever leadership game that you want to be in. So encourage you to get it. It's kind of like a compendium of all the things I've been working on, coaching for years, and all in one place.
And I can attest because I read it a couple of weeks ago, and it is excellent. It is really, really good, full of a lot of information. And listen, I need to have you come back because this 28 minutes and 50 seconds has gone by way too fast. So will you please come back?
Absolutely. And thank you so much. This has been as we knew it would be. It was because we planned a little bit, but I didn't know exactly what you were going to ask me. So
I know.
I know that's why you like it.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So thanks so much. And thanks everybody for attending or listening if you come late. So thanks for that. And if you want to, so you can, my email address, I think, is running across the graphic there. And I want to also offer that if you want to call me up for like a 20-minute free strategy session, you can reach me on talkwithlynda, LYNDA.com. And we can schedule you for a 20-minute free session, no obligation. And you can run your situation by me. And it doesn't have to be just about conflict. I coach in a lot of leadership and team development areas. So whatever you want to talk about, just give us a call. And we'll get on the schedule.
And please do, folks. Well, thank you. We'll do this again.
Great. Thanks, Joyce.
And I'll see you at 4 o'clock because we're in the same
That's right.
group. Good. Thanks so much, Lynda. So I sure hope that you enjoyed yourself as much as I did learning about good conflict and collaboration and everything in between. I'm definitely going to have Lynda McDermott again. Well, people say to me, Joyce, with all the coaches out there, what makes you different? And my clients discover how much it costs them when they don't resolve conflict or when they don't know how to resolve conflict. Money, relationships, a good night's sleep, inner peace. So all you have to do is contact me, either Joyce at joyceweiss.com, call me at 248-681-5831, and let's create a discovery call. That's all it is. It's no tension. We have to find out to make sure that I'm the right coach and you to find out exactly how I work. And I want to find out your expectations. So I thank you so much for joining me and for listening to Lynda. And like I say all the time, at the end of my programs, you get what you tolerate. Thanks for watching.